The City Press newspaper is reporting today that it may take up to 5 years to extradite the Gupta brothers and bring them to face justice in South Africa. Atul and Rajesh Gupta are accused of involvement in corruption. That's in the broader state capture-related picture. The UAE recently refused to extradite the brothers because of what it says was a failure by the South African government to meet strict standards for legal documentation. The spokesperson for the Justice Department, Chrispin Phiri, is with us in studio tonight to talk more about that report in the City Press. Chrispin, good evening, welcome. So could it really take up to 5 years, and how did you reach that calculation, if that's correct?
Yeah, you know, Tembegile, one day we must have a conversation about the sensationalism of headlines on their own. What the body of the article does capture quite correctly is what the minister says, that extraditions by their nature are very protracted. And that basically means that you can't put a time frame to an extradition matter. Sometimes it can happen very quickly, but sometimes it could take 5 years, sometimes it could take longer than 5 years. And that's essentially what is the crux of the message here, is that we can't put a time frame to an extradition matter. How likely is it, though, in the Gupta instance, that you could do it in under 5 years when you consider that they now have residents, they basically now are the people of Vanuatu, where we don't have an extradition treaty, correct? We don't, so you would not be able to bring them back, for instance, if they went to Vanuatu for the next 10 years? Yes, well, what is important with extradition matters, it really depends on the cooperation of the state. And also the legal processes of that particular country. So, for example, in South Africa, we have a Dutch national by the name of Mr. Kovenhaven, who we've just successfully extradited back to the Netherlands. And he's been in the country for over a period of 11 years in the court system, going through the various processes that our court systems do allow for. So it really depends on the cooperation of that particular country, but also its own legal system. So South Africa's legal system goes up right up to the Constitutional Court, and in between that there are easily 5 courts that you could go through with various court roles and process. So it's a matter of cooperation. Where did this 5 years come from that's mentioned in the article? Did the minister put that out there? The minister didn't say 5 years, but he said it could take 5 years. So he didn't say it could take 5 years. It's not definitive. You know, it could take less than 5 years. Could take more than 5 years. It could take more than 5 years, and that's really the crux. I think the importance of how we really portray what is being said by political principles is quite important, so that we don't portray sometimes speculative or sometimes matters that cannot be confirmed directly, but maybe just from past experience as a matter of fact. And I think that's what we see sometimes in most of our headlines, is a headline is portrayed as a matter of fact, whereas sometimes it's a speculative statement. Based on a conversation with the minister nonetheless, where he himself said it could take up to 5 years. So the City Press is not entirely wrong to put that number out there. It's not a matter of fact, though. So it's a speculative point. So it's based on a conversation with the minister, is my point. 100%, yeah. Okay. But of course, the headline doesn't show that, you know, he was speculating. I suppose once you click on the article, you understand what was said in full, right? Because the headline never tells the full story. But what is the status of the Gupta-related process as it stands? Because there was a great deal of disappointment a month and a half ago or so when you announced that basically extradition was not going to happen. Where do things stand now? Yes, since the 6th of April, when we updated the nation that indeed we've now since learned that the extradition process was long concluded in February. The minister has had a conversation with his counterpart in the UAE telephonically, expressing his disappointment at the manner in which they've handled this process. He's also had a meeting with the ambassador of the UAE to South Africa and has expressed his concern as to the manner in which they've treated us in this case, to which the ambassador has given an undertaking that he will definitely relay our message back to the UAE authorities. But we stand ready to refile all of our documents to ensure that these people are brought back to book. It's been a month. Why haven't you refiled yet? We are waiting for confirmation from the UAE exactly what the process is now that they have declined the process, and so that's what we are waiting for. But we stand ready. We have filed all our documents previously. That was all in order. And what is most important is we require a written explanation as to why the warrant that we had submitted, which was, we believe, the correct warrant, was not part of the court papers, because clearly it wasn't. And that is the issue, right? Because the UAE is basically saying that the extradition process or the attempt by South Africa fell apart because of a failure to meet strict standards related to documentation. There were 2 warrants, one was cancelled, and that appears to have been where the problem was. Yeah. Have they erred in their interpretation? And if indeed they have, what recourse does South Africa have? They've erred in their obligation in terms of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption Article 17, which actually says you can't dismiss an extradition on a technical issue. They've also erred in their obligation to actually inform us that, there are documents that are missing, which is what that article requires you to do. Before you actually process it before a court of law, you are required to say to a requesting country, this document is missing or this document is not in order. Then only you can file it to a court of law. But it seems they went ahead. And even when they actually did file the matters before the court of law, they didn't even have the courtesy to tell us that this matter is now before a court of law and is being processed by a court. We only had to learn after the fact. And that's what we take deep issue with.
Are the two Gupta brothers still in the UAE? Because they had managed to get out of the country already when you briefed us a month ago to say that the extradition application had failed.
Correct. There were speculative reports by other publications that they may have gotten out of the country. But we have gotten confirmation from Interpol that our red notice is still effective and is still active, which means that any country that they go out to that is under the jurisdiction of Interpol would have to inform us that indeed these individuals are there and we can bring an extradition request to that country. But even the UAE have that obligation.
Are they still in the UAE?
They fall under the jurisdiction of Interpol. We believe that they are because the UAE have not told us anything different. Should the UAE inform us that, in fact, they have records that these people have left, then we would then have to act accordingly. But as it stands currently, we believe that they may very well be in the UAE.
Quite brave, though, to rely on information from the UAE based on the fact that your information sharing wasn't great to begin with between South Africa and the UAE, just based on when the extradition application errors were picked up or deficiencies were picked up there, when communication eventually reached you that the application had failed. So how reliable is that information that they are in the UAE? Are you assuming that they still are? And when were you last told that they were there?
We've not been informed by any other nation, which is under the jurisdiction of Interpol, that they are in that nation. So we have to deduce that they are still in the UAE, and the UAE have an obligation to keep us updated if they are no longer in that jurisdiction. So that
they could be in a country without the jurisdiction.
They could be, but at this stage, the information that we have from all of the relevant authorities that have the jurisdiction and the ability to give us credible information, it doesn't point to them having left the country. And that's what we have to rely on.
Well, they had, according to some of the publications.
Speculatively.
Well, you also don't know for a fact that they are in the UAE tonight, correct? So we're all working based on what we've been informed by various people, and we can pick and choose who we believe. But if they are not in the UAE or another country bound by law on this issue, what happens then if they are in Vanuatu, for instance? I mean, I saw a report suggesting that they were looking at, for instance, at going into Cameroon, and there was an interest there in allowing them.
Yes, the rule of law expands everywhere. Under any rock, under any island, the rule of law does apply, and we will then rely on the laws that are applicable to us to ensure that we're able to bring an extradition application to that particular country. There's no country in the world that doesn't uphold the rule of law in terms of extradition laws, and we will pursue them wherever they are. Any foreign national, or any individual rather, who has violated the laws of this country, we will pursue them under any rock that they hide. We will ensure that.
How complicated would it be to get them out of or from under a rock in Vanuatu, for instance?
It may be complex, but we may find that Vanuatu may be a very cooperative country. So we will cross that bridge when we get there. But to ensure that we bring them to this country to face the rule of law, we will definitely do so. And we will not leave any stone unturned until we do so, because that is what is required of us. But ultimately, that's what the rule of law in this country deserves. People to come and account for allegations against them.
But these are expensive stones to turn. How much has been spent on trying to get the Gupta brothers back to South Africa, and how much more are you looking at spending on the process further?
It's difficult to say we've spent X amount. I mean, we do extraditions every day, so there's a dedicated unit that deals with extradition, so it's part and course of the job.
Millions?
It's not a specific amount that we can attach. There are people that are dealing with numerous extraditions all the time. So
would you be able to pull that number?
There's no special amount attached to this. No, there wouldn't be a specific amount attached to the Guptas. Processing paperwork and receiving memoranda and communicating via the diplomatic channels is what we're required to do. So it's part and course of the department's job.
Chrispin Phiri, good to speak to you as always.
Thank you very much.
Spokesperson for the Justice Ministry in studio tonight.